Great. We should be up and running. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully, you're here for a webinar about embedding BI into decision making and a great conversation that we're going to have with Tom and John, who I'll introduce in a moment, along with myself. Quick bit of housekeeping as we go through the discussion today. You've got the chat and the Q&A, so feel free to come in and ask questions as we go through, and I'll do my best to either pick them up during the discussion or come to them at the end of our time today. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. So I'll be the host for us all today. My name's James. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CTO at Cynozure. And if you're not familiar with Cynozure, we're a data analytics and AI consultancy working with customers on the end-to-end journey of delivering data. So that's everything from helping setting strategies through the execution of the strategies, whether it's designing and building data platforms, delivering analytics and BI solutions, working on governance and data management, operating models, and so on. We're joined today by Tom from the Cynozure team. Tom, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sorry about that. Had to let the cat into the room. Hi everyone, my name's Tom. I'm a solution architect working for Cynozure, and I focus mainly on the analytics and AI space. I've been working in sort of analytics and AI, I suppose, for a number of years now. I first got into it during my kind of research, postdoctoral research. I was doing my PhD, and that's when I kind of got into the world of data science. And then as soon as I realised that research wasn't my main focus in life, I left and jump into the business world, where I worked for a company called LW Theatres as a data analyst and then a data scientist for a number of years before joining Cynozure. So that's a little bit about me. Over to you, John.
Tom. And we're joined by Jon from our brilliant partners, Omni. Jon, if you want to introduce yourselves and tell people a little bit about Omni in case they're not familiar with the platform.
Sure thing. So I'll start with the Omni side. So Omni is an analytics platform that covers BI and embedded analytics, AI-driven insight, all while being sort of fast and flexible and without sacrificing governance and reliability. And specifically, my role with Omni is I'm a solutions architect for the EMEA customer base. But actually, it's a fairly recent thing. I joined the company in February. Prior to that, I was actually on the other side of the line. I've been doing some various data leadership roles for the previous decade. Most recently, VP of Data at a company called Scopely in the gaming space. Also been head of BI at a fintech company called Go Cardless and various other things in other industries over the years. So, but now I'm on the vendor side.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jon. And I mean, that's a great lead into the first question I wanted to ask you guys, is you both have a lot of experience across a whole different set of companies and tools and so on. So I wanted to ask you about, just to kind of get a feel for that experience, what's been either the biggest success you've had with the BI project or the biggest, most explosive failure you've had? And feel free not to name names, especially if it's the latter. And is there anything that you've really taken away from those experiences and have carried forward into future BI projects and engagements that you've been doing? I mean, Jon, if I throw that to you first. Sure.
Hopefully I've got more examples of the success and the failure, but let me start with a failure. Actually, this was sort of one that came from a successful kind of backdrop. It was a project where we managed to achieve some really good analytics outcomes, really healthy self-service across different branches, different business units. And then naturally, as you sort of build in those nodes, you want to sort of bring that all together and get an end-to-end view of the business. So, the idea was to be able to take sort of top of funnel, go into looking at sales team efficiency, target addressable market coverage, then into product utilization and upsell opportunity and that whole virtuous circle. And we had a great tech, great team, great momentum. We had, top down and bottom up buy-in for everything. And yet we were unsuccessful with that particular project. Why? Well, actually, it was nothing particularly technical, although if I was going to express it in technical terms, it would be that what we realized is we did not have a primary key, foreign key relationship, but that was the canary in the coal mine. What we realized was actually the problem is we didn't have a single definition of the customer in the business. So what you had is you had sales teams who had Salesforce. Their representation of the customer was, different business entities. There'd be Tesco HQ, Tesco Insurance, car insurance, home insurance, whatever it may be, as trivial examples. Then you might have the product team with their transactional database. Their representation of a customer is much more account-based, so perhaps one account per use case, for example. Maybe then a support team who had a simpler representation of what they thought a customer was in Zendesk. And when we try to stitch this all together, we realized actually everyone thinks the customer is a different thing. And we weren't really able to build that mapping because it wasn't a technical challenge, it was one of semantics. And what we realized, ultimately the lesson learned was, we needed to, the data team was the people who saw the problem, but what we needed to do was to explain, this is why this matters. This is how we need to align as a business on what a customer really is, what's our atomic unit. And then let's make sure that's expressed in all our systems of records and that people understand and talking that same language. And then with that, we can take it forward. On the flip side, on the sort of success side of things, there was a moment that was really awesome where, again, sort of building on a level of momentum in analytics and self-serve, had a product leader, a VP of product in this case, who'd sort of seen the impact that was having in other areas of the business, bought into the self-serve idea, was able to have some wins themselves, and made the sort of bold decision to stand up and say to his product and engineering team, hey, look, no new feature is going to be approved without the PRD, including the analytics back up front. And what we mean by that, is, a definition of what KPI are we trying to move with this feature? How are we going to measure it, both in terms of defining the leading indicators and making sure fundamentally they were captured at source? Do we need to change any analytics events or emit new events, for example? And then finally, what's the, is there a wireframe of a dashboard that we can imagine? Or do we need to adjust the existing dashboards or analytics products? Without those things, product doesn't move forward. And that was incredible. That was a real kind of mic drop moment in terms of seeing the impact. And I guess the lesson learned there was, analytics can be a superpower, but the real kind of watershed moment comes when, that's really get tied into business processes and culture.
That's also, I really recognize some of the things there, that particularly that point around definition of customer. I've done exercises together with clients building out conceptual data models, and it's always question number one for us is, what does a customer mean? And I don't think I've ever walked in anywhere where there's only been one definition that you had to align, and you're probably lucky if you've only got two at that starting point. So yeah, I think I can absolutely recognize why that would be a stumbling block. I mean, Tom, what about you? What are the sort of success or failures that really stand out for you?
Yeah, there was definitely something there from what you were saying, John, that resonate with me. I'll start with the failure side, because that was the one that kind of struck out to me. And as you were saying there, around that some lack of single customer view, but like a lack of definition of customer. I think lack of definition of various business entities, domains. It could be calculations, measures, whatever they are. But that's certainly something I've seen a number of times in my career where BI has failed. I mean, a great example, when I used to work in kind of the theatre world, there were two types of net financial figure value. One was a financial net, which obviously we know is kind of like gross less of VAT and all that good stuff. And then there was also this thing, there was a theatrical net, which was a more complicated figure, which would take into account commissions and all that sort of stuff, which the ticketing team and the promoters would take. And these two values were handed around the business as being just the net figure, the net theatrical figure. And so the number of times where you'd have that on different dashboards and people would look at the number and question, oh, why is that number different? Why is that number different? Why do I not see the same thing? Because they weren't kind of clearly defined or clearly clearly labeled, I suppose is the first thing, but clearly defined in a single place. That's definitely one thing. Data governance and quality around metrics and measure definitions is definitely a failure I've seen more broadly. I guess another example of failures, I didn't kind of think of a single one for me that stood out, but I've got some examples of, there's 3 points that I think come up a lot of times. The other one I've seen is, I think, jumbled, people not being clear on the objectives and just doing dashboards and visuals for visual's sake is another kind of criminal thing to do. KPI dashboarding is something I've worked on a lot recently. And whilst they're incredibly powerful, the number of times I've seen businesses not be particularly focused and laser focused on the KPIs they want to measure and try and cram too many on a dashboard is just a textbook, I think, failure in my mind, because no one's going to use this dashboard and be able to get value from it if they are kind of confused or there's too much to look at. And so if you've got 25 KPIs on the page, that kind of, like, to me, blows out the water the definition of a key performance indicator, having 25. But people don't know what to focus on. And so again, that kind of leads into my final point that I've seen is sort of training and use and guidance on using dashboards. I think, like, we're probably in this day and age pretty familiar with BI and dashboards. They're not a new thing in the data space or in the business space, but I think we'd be pretty surprised at the number of places we've done work where relying on them day to day is still quite a new thing for a lot of organizations. And so I think I've seen a number of people trip up where done some great work, you've done all the right things and built a really great dashboard, but that final step of just communicating what it is, what it's showing, how do you use it, and then putting that in front of the business stakeholder has led to it sort of being, oh, this is great, really nice, and then just not being used because people don't feel comfortable to go to it. And so, yes, I think there's definitely something to be said there around improving documentation and communication around, like, BI and how to use it, how to get the most out of it. That's the failures. Do you want me to do a success?
I was going to say, you both picked up there on people-based problems rather than technology-based problems in there, which is interesting, and often a common cause of problems, not just in the BI space, but often in any kind of technical implementation of data. Is there a big success for you that stands out?
Well, I was going to say around successes, the one that stood out to me was, I think, this idea of, like, with BI and analytics in general, a little can always go a long way. And we had a great case study. I think James knows this one because we worked on it together at Cynozure. But we had a client who were looking to kind of make some quite serious kind of reductions in costs and to boost revenue to kind of to fill a shortfall. It was around the time after the Ukraine war had kicked off. We were all going through that really uncertain time where energy prices were going through the roof, and this was a big business that had quite a lot of substantial costs to run their business, and so energy wise that was a big thing. So they had to go out and it's quite ambitious target to achieve multiple million increase in revenue in the next cycle, and they wanted to do this by reanalyzing and reassessing their product structure, basically. And so they brought us in. We came in, myself, James, and our colleague Anthony came in. We did this piece of work. It was, pretty quick, short, sharp piece of analytics work, 4 to 6 weeks. We came in, demonstrated to them some data quality improvements they could make, and built a fairly robust but simple model to demonstrate different ways they could pull levers to improve to reprice their products. And then they took it all on board, really liked the output, and then they went away and did it. And of course, we then reached back out a number of months later and to see, did you actually hit this target? And they did. And so it was, and without really numbers, but I think the ROI they got from that was a huge, like, so hundreds and hundreds of %, because the outlay and the time spent on doing that short, sharp analytics project really translated into a really substantial gain in revenue. So I think, little always goes a long way. That's my kind of, like, sentence to remember from in terms of BI.
In that example, I think one of the things that made that one really powerful was that you had the MD really bought into using BI to make those decisions and seeing through its execution. And given the fact that both of you have picked up on the people element, when it comes to better engaging stakeholders across the organization, whether that be your exec through to a frontline team, maybe that's a call center or a sales team, etc. Is there, any tips that you've got for how you can better engage those stakeholders to make sure that any BI initiatives are impactful? Jon, why don't we pass over to you?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. Actually, one that I've heard repeatedly and regularly is around starting at the exec level, especially in startups and scale-ups where execs equals founders, often equals person who, or at least one of them, may have written the original database schema and are desperate to, they see letting go of that as somehow symptomatic of letting go of key parts of the business or losing velocity in some way. And whether it's someone who doesn't want to let go or someone you're, on the exec level, you're trying to sort of bring on the journey and get behind you, there's a few things that have worked well for me over the years. So generally, first of all, I try to show them where the waste is. So, if they're the ones writing a query, for example, I will go to them and I'll say, listen, out of interest, how many times do you think at least one person and yourself in this company wrote that same join this week? And is that duplication of effort the competitive differentiator for us? Is that what we think our customers are saying, this is how you deliver value? I doubt it very much. And then I talk about the error rate. So assuming that more than one person has done that this week, including yourself, how many of those people do you think got it right first time? Answer, probably not many. And then finally, it's if they don't, often this is self-evident, but still worth calling out, the sort of wasted meetings and cycles, like how often a strategic or operational decision or action gets postponed because the key meeting in that decision process is derailed by sales saying their version of the number was right versus marketing saying their number was right. And then eventually, meeting wraps up where the only action item is go away, figure out who's right and who's wrong. So really trying to sort of spell out that waste and it helps get them on board, in my opinion, of going, okay, yes, I see that either I need to let go or I need to help you help sponsor this and get this moved forward. And then, going a next level deeper, if they won't let go, like picking one of their use cases and sort of teaching them how to fish in a self-serve way and going, I'm going to make this more repeatable for you. I can look in their metadata in the data warehouse or in the BI tool that you're using. I can go and see what it is they do all the time, and then I can go build that for them and take it to them in 10, 15 minutes, show here's a different way, and that works well. And then lastly, sort of moving beyond the exec point, I would say really, focusing on the people side of things, it's about identifying your champions, those people who are going to drive the project forward for you. So, engaging them, in my experience, most people on a data team already have a mental model of who the potential champions are in their business. They're the people who turn up on Slack or Teams all the time asking analytical questions, even if they're not an analyst. They're the people who come to the office hours that you may be running. They're the finance analyst, who spends 3 days a month under immense pressure, desperately trying to pull spreadsheets together for the exec monthly. Those are the people who are, explicitly or not, begging for help. And if you can get them on side and prove the value to them in a targeted way, the rest kind of takes care of itself in terms of the momentum that builds.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, I agree. And on that point, especially my point around the three kind of main points I had around how we can better engage business stakeholders across the whole level of the business really is I think having a positive data culture, which is around, as you say, around that people-centric focus for BI is absolutely crucial. And getting people to understand across all levels the importance of data, whether you're at operational level, whether you're an exec, whether you're the CEO making strategic decisions, is absolutely imperative. And so obviously there's a variety of ways you could do that. You could run full-fledged culture programs across the business to get better understanding of data and how it's used, but also you could do things all the way down to running specific sort of data literacy programs, which will help you your data users understand how best to use their data. And another thing I would say on that is around just make sure as well, if you're in a position in the data team to kind of push and get the AI, get your BI better understood, is to kind of push the success stories where you have them. I think that's another critical thing. A lot of the time with BI and analytics is everyone's working tooth and nail to get things done, and there's often a lot of successes, and the dashboards are great and they're producing great insights and people are relying on them, but everyone's too busy to actually just shout out, okay, actually let's share success. It's a really important one. I think a number of times I've seen that done poorly, and it just means that the team gets kind of bogged down and sometimes kind of can't get out of their own way when it comes to problems, etc. So I think just celebrating the wins where you can is another important one. I had actually a good example in this front, and I think that is to make the BI, if possible, embedded and as seamless as you So one of the things I've been working with a client recently is with the Omni implementation of BI and dashboarding, is that one of the clients use Notion, a very popular note-taking app, and it's like a wiki app now, isn't it? You can use it to build entire company portals and wikis on it, and that's what they've done. So they've built this company portal on Wiki, and because Omni is nice and seamless, and you can embed it nicely into a web page, I've seen that dashboard they've built for whatever business unit or business area embedded neatly into the wiki page for that area. And so why is that important? Because it means that people are already going to the wiki page, they're already going into Notion, and they can also see their BI, their dashboard at the same time. So it kind of reduces that friction to accessing the report, which again is another big factor for organizations being able to make better use of it and embed it more.
Meet people where they are, basically, is help reduce that friction to actually getting to the thing. It's make it not another portal to log into, another thing to remember where you need to go and look. Jon, there's a point you mentioned in there in terms of one of those ways you can help engage about teaching them to fish, helping those teams get self-sufficient. And I guess self-service BI has been an aspirational goal for many organizations for a very long time, but few ever really achieve it to a great degree of success. Is there something you think organizations can do differently to really be successful when it comes to getting self-service BI in place and working well?
Yeah, there are. I think I've been lucky enough to relatively crack this with my teams over the years, and there's been a few things that have had in common that have worked well. I mean, there are many reasons these things that can fail for reasons that are outside of your control. Opaque and unreliable data, inconsistent definitions, all the stuff. Some of the things we've talked about can be headwinds, but the common themes that have really helped get through some of this stuff is one, working from both ends of the problem at the same time. Starting by partnering with the owners of the source data, the systems of records, to make sure, to the earlier points that we were making around sort of definition and quality, that you're looking at that at the beginning and getting buy-in there, whilst also starting from the end and thinking, how are we going to serve this insight? I think you both made great points around dashboards for the sake of dashboards, charts for the sake of charts. A mistake I think people often make is they start by designing a bunch of dashboards that they're hoping to eventually achieve, and they go away and build these things in a vacuum, or they mistake the dashboard for really the outcome. The outcome really is either insight or action. So starting to think about where we're going to push this data, and what action is going to be triggered about what insight we're trying to do. So the cautionary tale is those teams that they build those dashboards and there's ambivalence, or they go away and they model a bunch of data for ages. Then they decide later how they're going to serve that data, by which time they realized, actually, the way I've modeled this doesn't really make sense in that context. I've got to go back again and change that. So I guess my point is, start from both ends, own the origin of the data, think about where it's going to, and then work, towards one another. What else? So I'd say it goes a bit back to the sort of champions point earlier. Start small and start fast. Pick one or two high impact use cases. Those success stories that Tom was talking about. The ideal is that we're able to sort of blow our own trumpets a bit and then have a lot of other people advocating on our behalf as each of them goes, wow, that really moved things forward. And pick those sort of high impact, low complexity use cases so that the momentum really develops from there. We're not trying to deliver a monolith here. And then finally, I would say, again, avoiding the sort of monolith point. Businesses, they typically move very fast and they evolve over time. It's impossible to sort of snapshot them, build something over a period of many months, and then come back and sort of with a big reveal. So we need to be agile, we need to be adaptable, and therefore we need to be targeted in the areas that we're doing. And then finally, I would say the key thing for me has always been a semantic layer. That is the piece that brings the whole thing together. That is the place where you can hand on heart vouch for the accuracy, the role-based controls, the kind of articulation of the business through data in a way that can be scaled horizontally and vertically for new use cases in a way that's really sort of both flexible and governed. That's the kind of secret sauce that unlocks it from a technical point of view.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's something that Omni does particularly well, and one of the things that kind of drew us to the tool and wanting to partner with you guys. Tom, yeah, what about yourself? Any ideas on how to make self-service successful?
I was going to just iterating and completely agree with John on that final point, particularly about the semantic layer. I think from my perspective as working as a consultant the last few years as well, like it's although I think we all know in practice that the semantic layer is kind of that nice curated environment where business users can go to access their data, whether it's through a dashboard or whether it's through self-service. But the number of times where we've seen people on the journey, it's still kind of a relatively mature part of the journey, is to get to that point with the semantic layer. And we haven't seen people do it probably as well as they could do, and because they haven't had the time and the chance to in their journey, right? So I think, but putting that in place is, as John says, incredibly important. It's the one bit in the data team where you can take ownership and you can curate all of these sources of data who might be owned by different parts of the business or what into your one-stop shop for data. And that's, as you say, you can control the access, you can control the documentation, the metadata, the context that you're sharing about each of those points in the semantic layer. So you've really got that control, and it's your place to make data engaging and accessible to people. And so that was the one thing. But one other way I've always felt is important, and it's a phrase. It stems from a phrase that we always hear when we're doing BI and stuff. Is like this idea of killing Excel or demoting Excel or removing Excel from an organization. We talk about it a lot when it comes to sort of data journeying and integrations and things like that. And so, whilst there is truth behind wanting to remove Excel, I think removing the idea of working in siloed Excel spreadsheets or CSVs to ingest and analyze data, we want to get rid of that. But actually, it's a bit of the phrase is pounded around a lot, and I think it puts an Excel in a negative light. And Excel is a really powerful tool, right? It's been around for as long as it has been because it is incredibly useful. And so lots of business users and stakeholders are quite rightly very familiar with it. And so I think where self-service can be really effective is to present data in a number of ways to people. So leveraging an Excel-like UI, for example. And that's something I think, again, Omni and the product there has done really well, is to bake into where you interact with your data through Omni a number of different ways. You can do it through a SQL query, you can do it through sort of drag and drop columns and features and dimensions onto a page, and then you can interact with it with an Excel looking spreadsheet like table and do Excel like functions. And just making that familiar to people, again, reduces friction. If you can reduce friction at any point by making things familiar, easy to access, then you're going to get a much better appetite to self-service. My final point was just around, again, to what John was saying around metadata, and it kind of folds back into the semantic layer, was just, I think, good communication as well. Is a lot of the time tech teams might do all this great work to build a semantic layer. Like I've seen teams get really into using DBT, for example, as it is a great tool. It's great for organizing models and defining models and documenting and all that good stuff. But everyone kind of gets bogged down a bit in it, and they do all the technical side of things, but they forget to share it or share how to use it with the business. And that's what another area where things can kind of get unstuck, is that lack of communication and collaboration. So things like regular show and tells, business drop-ins, hackathons, those sort of things, just sort of friendly and low friction ways for people to interact with the data and for you to demonstrate how to use it and how to get the most out of it. It's another, I think, really crucial bit to embedding service.
It's that real balance, isn't it? That's what I think I'm hearing from you guys, is on the one hand, something like a semantic layer enables some governance and control so that people are seeing the right stuff defined in the right way and only the stuff that they should see. But on the flip side, it should make it easier to do things. It should reduce the challenge of, as perhaps a more novice user of this stuff, putting together your own solutions, building your own dashboards, and that includes by having those interfaces that actually reaches a larger skill set out there. So for those who aren't, say, fluent in SQL, etc., they've got, whether it's drag and drop or Excel-like interfaces, etc., you're appealing to a range of people. Brilliant. I'm going to change topic for a second, because what data webinar wouldn't be complete without talking about AI. It feels like we're at a really exciting place in the journey of BI at the moment. We're seeing the sort of next generation of tools starting to emerge that are rethinking some of the existing paradigms and improving and enhancing on some of those, Omni being one of them. How are you guys seeing AI reshaping things today already, because this stuff is emerging in tools, but also what's your vision? How do you see this evolving over, say, the next 3 to 5 years? Jon, I mean, this must be something you guys are talking about all the time over at Omni.
100%. And firstly, like, full disclosure, I was a bit of a skeptic until not so long ago about this. My feeling was running, teams of analytics engineers and analysts where every person more or less end-to-end understood how the sausage is made, for want of a better phrase. The idea that you could insert an LLM into that, of a supposed black box and still trust it, I struggled to get my head around that initially. And what I realized fairly recently, seeing this kind of play out from the Omni perspective, is actually what was missing in my way of thinking about it was that actually it's not a black box. It's something that you can trust. It's on the right guardrails. That with the right context, and that then you can really unlock the power of the thing without having to be paranoid about what's really going on under the hood. So, and then, there's coming at it from another angle. Like, I think my other reflection on this is that I'd underestimated a lot how much of my mental energy, my time, my team's time, my colleagues' time was focused on this question of how can you get a business user to understand how to use this BI tool effectively. This is how these are the levers you need to pull, these are the buttons you need to push. And also on the other end, like when building data products and so on, like, how can I be confident in interpreting the questions that I think my users are asking or going to ask, and make sure that everything I model and build is aligned with what is inherently quite an imperfect understanding. And so to your question about like what's changing, how it's changing, is like seeing firsthand. Actually, once you don't have to worry about that so much, you're not thinking of how else you're actually engaging in a much more organic, natural language way with the AI, and it's seeing that you're able to return accurate answers to nuanced questions, also with kind of highly relevant suggestions for additional areas for exploration. As I realized, well, hold on. All this, how do you use the tool friction? It doesn't go away completely, but it radically reduces, and that sort of being the interlocutor, that broker of meaning between question and answer, really sort of scales in a radically different way. To put a sort of a trivial example on this, I always think about date filters. You work for a company with a sort of its own idiosyncratic definition of a financial year, and you have someone saying, okay, I want to compare the second Saturday of period 2 in this financial year that's idiosyncratic to us with the same one a couple of periods ago. In a SQL, in BI tools, that's really hard to express, to visualize and to interpret. And yet I was able to explain it there in my mother tongue relatively intuitively, I think. And so given the right context, an LLM can really, jump on that, not waste time thinking, how do I express this as SQL? How do I go back and forth with my BI tools, date filters to achieve this? And what you get then is that sort of rapid acceleration of the learning path, and then access to much deeper understanding, rather than sort of wrangling the sort of technical limitations of the way you interact with something. And that's very achievable with the right guardrails, and it's we're seeing it very transformational.
I think guardrails is a real common theme across all AI activities at the moment, whether it's in BI or any other agentic use or embedding inside applications, etc. That a lot of customers we're talking to have tried stuff and found the challenges that come with building on new technology, and are then focused in on the governance and the guardrails and controls, both from a sort of policy process point of view as well as the technical aspects of it as well. So it's clearly the same prevalent thing is relevant in there. I mean, have you got a big prediction, Jon, for sort of 5 years' time, as a average user? Maybe look at a chart. Am I just going to come in and, talk to my my AI dashboard?
So balancing my earlier cynicism, which already proves me out as a poor predictor of the future, but also going back to Tom's point earlier about, you know, Excel and it's, you know, this infinite survivability of that aspect of analytics. My guess is, you know, dashboards will still exist. People will still need to, you know, leverage some of the things they leverage today, but without sounding hopefully too vague, like I think the level of question and the level of insight will go many levels deeper. It'll be less about tell me, you know, what happened recently. Hopefully I get that right to, well, that question naturally leads to another question, which naturally leads to another question. So I think it's, you know, I'm not sure I can predict what the average workday will look like, but I guess what I'm feeling very confident about is the acceleration of the analytics flow. And the value that will be, you know, will increase pretty exponentially from here.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I think like from my point of view, I agree. I think my kind of big three things, I think that where it's really shaping BI at the moment and where it'll be in the future is, I mean, natural language and querying, as Jon said, there is a really big thing which will only get better, right? I mean, as you say, like at the moment, you can ask it things. I remember going back when I was working in my previous role, I'm using Tableau, and Tableau introduced one of the, like an early version of a natural language querying engine for it, and you had to, and you could ask it a question in sort of, you had to ask a question very broken. You basically had to write in English the SQL query you would want to get anything remotely useful. And of course now with the advancement of generative AI and the LLMs that are being used in the market these days, it's gone on leaps and bounds. And so even like my experimentation using the Omni product more recently and getting used to that has shown kind of where that can go, and like really embedding natural language. And I think that's going to get better. As you say, you're going to ask it questions in a conversational style. And I think you were saying there about you can ask it at the moment. The first stage will be to ask it kind of descriptive. I like to think of analytics in kind of three main segments. You've got descriptive, predictive, and then prescriptive analytics. And so at the moment we might be asking it for things like what's this? What was our results on in this quarter for this product last year, or etc., etc. And then, but you might, but I think as it gets better, you'll be able to ask it more prescriptive questions, and you might even be able to ask it an opinion. What do you think is the answer? And it'll come back with things because it'll only get better with the more access to data and insight it has. I also think as well that one of the areas where AI has been is becoming really important, not just my day to day, anyone in that kind of analytics space, is the advancements in what people are referring to as vibe coding now, right? Which is using tools like Copilot for VS Code or Cursor AI powered IDEs for writing analytics. And so I can see that becoming a really important asset to any senior analyst or junior analyst, where you can essentially rely on the AI or analytics intern, as I like to call it, to kind of do all the heavy lifting, to fast track some of your code development to create these insights and to create things like bespoke analysis or Python scripts and repetitive calculations and all that sort of stuff. You can do that a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently by leaning on Gen AI. And I think in the future, in 5 years' time, one of the things that we've seen that I think it can't do as well, or from my experience, it can't do as well at the moment. It's very good at the kind of the coding and the writing code in words, but what it's not so good is explaining it in pictures or in visually how to build visualizations. And I think that will only get better. And we've seen it come on forever. If you remember trying to use Copilot to create a PowerPoint slide back when Copilot first came in, it was absolutely useless. It's now getting better at that, but I can see that becoming more embedded into becoming embedded into BI tools as well, asking it to create you a chart of a certain type, and then it can have a really good stab at doing that in a nice, visual, sleek way.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that principle that you both described there of we're going to see increasing sophistication in this space that's going to allow me to ask bigger questions. I'm also I think the other side of it of how AI is going to start explaining what you're looking at to people to help them actually interpret complex data sets or results and bring that context as well, potentially context from the data that you're looking at, but context maybe from wider business assets that it's got access to, maybe your SharePoint site, your business strategy, as well as third-party context. Maybe that's market trends that are going on to really help superpower what you can get out of a dashboard as a user and how it can help you really frame the understanding. There's a demo that we often use based on some F1 data, so it's race performance data. And what we know as the people who've prepped it is that at a certain point in history, they changed the points in races. So if you start to just try and add up points over time, it messes with your results if you don't have that context. So AI is really great, kind of going, hang on, I know that there was a change in the point system. Let me even that out for you. So that extra context, I think, is going to be really interesting to just make dashboards, make BI, etc., more valuable. Just with an eye on time, I'm going to ask you guys one last question. So with all of that in mind, that we're heading into a space where AI is going to become prevalent, not in BI, but across our organizations. What's the one thing, and just with time in mind, one thing that you would encourage people to think about when they're going out and they're designing and thinking about their BI initiatives now, that they should be putting in place, whether that be a thing or about culture, about people, operating model, could be anything. So one thing you'd encourage people to put in place to best prepare themselves for the oncoming BI future. Jon, why don't we go with you first?
Yeah. So I think for me, it goes back to context in the same way that people do, and the semantic layer feels very logical place to hold that. If you're already explaining to users what a field means to them, you're already explaining how to write the SQL to answer that. It's very natural that you put the AI context alongside that, so that you're explaining to the LLM, hey, these are example questions people like. This is a SQL snippet that tells you how to answer it. These are the synonyms that people use: revenue, gross bookings, total sales, their equivalent. These are example values. All of these things, they naturally in the Omni world sit side by side with the same way that you're expressing your SQL definition. So really that sort of that context point is key, and the semantic layer is the natural unlock for that, to make sure that, hey, permissions, metadata, context, everything works together in a single place.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point with Jon. I was going to say something similar around semantic layer and being able to add context. And again, stop without blowing too much smoke up. Omni, it's a great. That's one of the things I've seen Omni do really well, is like being able to embed into the semantic layer. The model you define now is specific context, and I've seen that, and I've demoed that to clients, and I've seen that really benefit and be useful. But I think even with that in place, there's still something around, as you said, James, around the people and trust to be done, I think, in future, to getting really to really embracing AI. Like, I mean, I think that trust point, I think people are always going to be, business users are always going to, well, my kind of touch point at the moment has been, there's still a lot of skepticism around it. I mean, people are becoming more aware and saying, okay, well, it's here, everyone's using it, all the big players are using it, but there's still this kind of lack of trust. And I was doing a very long drive recently, and I was listening to some audiobooks, and I was listening to Harry Potter book 2, and there was a line in it which really struck me as being quite relevant to AI. Mr. Weasley says to Ginny, his daughter, after she is caught writing in a diary that thinks for itself, he says, never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brain. And I think a lot of people have an attitude like that to generative AI and to these big large language models. And so I think there's definitely a way to prep for that, and how to kind of overcome that kind of conception is to build trust in it. And the only way you can build trust in it is to prove to people that it's built on good data quality, well managed data. The data has, it can be as correct as it can be, but it has the right context in place through the semantic layer. So I think, yeah, a big thing that anyone can do, any business, it can be to look at that kind of trust building exercise through communication, technical, data quality improvements, all that sort of good stuff. But yeah.
Great. And points to everyone who had a Harry Potter reference on their bingo cards for this webinar. We're sort of at time now, so Jon, Tom, thank you so much for your insights and input during that discussion. That was great. For anyone watching, if you would like to find out more about Cynozure, you can check out cynozure.com and check out our work and services on there. And if you're interested in finding out more about Omni, you can check out omni.co. There's loads of great demos and things that are posted on there regularly showing off the tools. So if the discussion around AI and its use in BI has piqued your interest as well, there's lots of good stuff to check out there. So thank you so much for coming along, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good speaking.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
me.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you.